My name, of course, is Brandy Colsey from Next Dimension, and I would like to reintroduce you to Tom and Peter. Tom Bigos, would you like to give us a few words about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Good morning, Pete. Good morning, Brandy. I'm Tom Bigos. Cybersecurity is my thing. I've been doing it for a very long time and have worked in many different verticals. But in addition to penetration testing over the last 10, 11 years, I've also done some training as well. I used to, and still do user awareness training and consulting, how to improve your network, how to improve Windows, harden those environments, and make sure that the bad guys don't get in. So, been having a lot of fun.
Awesome. And we've had so much fun. We ran out of time the first time, which is why we're here today. And of course, with us, we have Peter Clissold. Peter, tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, good morning, Brandy and Tom, and good morning, everybody. My name's Peter Clissold. I'm with Asset Risk and Security Services. I'm a cybersecurity consultant, and I've worked for many years in the field too. I have quite a decent amount of experience in cybersecurity, and I've worked with these guys for quite a while too as well. So I'm looking forward to helping everyone with this webinar this morning.
Awesome. And of course, we are continuing our conversation from that Rise of Ransomware event that we held with Forbes magazine's Danny Pehar just a few weeks back. Of course, we had so many great questions, and that I think was the fastest hour I've ever spent on an online event. And so it's no surprise that we did run out of time. We had more questions than we had time to answer. So I thank you both for coming back together today. And we are going to answer some of these questions we didn't get to. So without further ado, the very first question we received that we weren't able to get to was, customers are looking to add additional technology, such as vulnerability scanning, a tool of some sort, to add to their IT portfolio, believing that this will allow them to stay ahead of cyber attacks infiltrating their network. How do we feel about using a single tool for reducing or eliminating threats? Is it sufficient? What say you, gentlemen?
Well, Pete, if you don't mind, I'll jump in first. So acquiring a vulnerability scanner is definitely a step in the right direction. However, in my mind, it's not a matter of choosing one vendor or another vendor, because sometimes, of course, people say, well, I've got, Rapid7's Nextpost vulnerability scanner. Others might say, well, I use Nessus, I use Koalas. There's all these different products out there. Which one is better? Well, it's really hard to say because that answer is very subjective, right? I mean, I've used both Rapid7's Nextpost vulnerability scanner and its competitor, Nessus vulnerability scanner from Tenable. Both products work really well. But it really comes down to, it's just like saying, is Mac better than Windows or is Windows better than Mac? It really depends on who you ask. One person's going to tell you one thing, another person's going to tell you another thing, right? Like I said, it's very subjective. So instead, what I would argue is having a vulnerability scanner is just a small part of the overall security strategy. A vulnerability scanner serves, in my mind, only one specific purpose. It's the beginning, and it's also is it the beginning and end of a security strategy? I would basically say no, that it's not, right? Cybersecurity, Pete, I'm sure you'll agree with this, is a roadmap, right? It's a plan, it's a strategy with a lot of different moving parts. And just like anything else in IT, it's never static, right? Therefore, a vulnerability scanner will really never replace a fluid security program, and it should never be thought of as the one and only tool that you would have in your cybersecurity chest, right? So in my mind, a cybersecurity program must include security training for IT, because we don't know everything, right? IT cannot be experts in everything, especially security, right? I mean, they're typically busy, keeping the lights on and things like that, right? User awareness training is another one, because a lot of the problems that we see day in, day out begin with the regular users, of Active Directory on any network. And then, of course, we've got the other side, which is proper hardening of Windows and Active Directory. unfortunately, out of the box, Windows and Active Directory have a lot of insecure settings, which are kept enabled by Microsoft for backwards compatibility. Sometimes I really wish Microsoft would take a page out of Apple's book, because Apple will basically say, you know what, as of today, we're no longer supporting this and this and this. So too bad, you have to upgrade or you're done, right? And Microsoft unfortunately doesn't do that. So we have a lot of these issues where backwards compatibility, for backwards compatibility reasons, right? So you've got security training for IT, you've got user awareness training, proper hardening of Windows and Active Directory, and then I would say vulnerability discovery. So this is where your vulnerability scanner would come in, right? So you use that thing to do automated scans to locate those things. But then, of course, you also need to worry about and perform regular security assessments. So your traditional penetration test, whether it's from the outside, whether it's from the inside. Personally, myself, I think you get a lot more bang for your dollar if you do an internal penetration test, because an external test is very singular in its nature, right? Someone tries to get into your network through a remote portal, and then as soon as that pen tester achieves domain admin, that's kind of where the game ends, right? Whereas an internal assessment is very complex, it's very holistic. So it looks at not just, can I get domain admin on this network, but it might look at Windows, it'll look at the firewall, it's going to look at wireless, it's going to look at, all these additional components. So it's going to give you a much better, broader overview. A regular security assessment is, a huge part of your security strategy. So as you can see, and sorry for taking up so much time, a very long-winded answer, but a comprehensive security strategy has many moving parts. So it's not any one solution. And I really dislike the idea of purchasing a single, and I like to call this a magical device that will solve all of your security problems, right? Unfortunately, in some cases, salespeople, and I hope this doesn't come across in a negative way, but sometimes they're too focused on sales, right? So they're going to try to, this vendor might sell you, like I said, a magical device that will solve all your security problems. And they make all these promises. You install it, you get it going, and then unfortunately things don't work out that well. And typically the reason why is because the device was never configured properly, right? So a good example of that might be a brand new firewall. In my mind, from my experience, and again, this is my own personal experience, the Palo Alto firewalls are absolutely amazing in what they can do. They're very expensive, but they work really well. However, I have been to environments where the Palo Alto was configured very poorly. Hence, I was able to do a lot of bad things. Then on the flip side, I've been to places where the Palo Alto was configured very, very well, and I couldn't do a whole lot. So that's just an example of, buying these devices. It's great that you bought one, but you have to take the time to configure it properly, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I'm going to wrap up my answer now. Over to you, Pete, if you have anything else to add. Thank you.
No, Tom, I completely agree. The only thing I would maybe add in to summarize is that zero trust approach is recommended, and zero trust includes assuming that you're going to be breached. And so planning for that, incident response planning, recovery planning is very key elements to vulnerability scanner will not prevent, for example, a password spray attack or a phishing attack. So that's just examples of what Tom was correctly saying there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you totally. And I think in many of the environments that I visit, the problem comes down to the basics, right? And what do I mean by basics? That, the hardening of Windows, hardening of Active Directory, right? Making sure that the attacker, you're reducing your attack surface, so then the attacker can't actually do a whole lot on your network. So a really good example of that would be Windows App Locker. Windows App Locker is an amazing tool, that's available with Windows. Unfortunately, over the last 10, 11 years, I think I've only come across Windows App Locker in 1, 2, or maybe 3 places that come to mind, right? So that's a very, very small percentage. But yet, if you implement something like Windows App Locker properly, then I would even suggest that ransomware would know. So let me rephrase. If everyone in the world today or tomorrow implemented Windows App Locker to its fullest capability, ransomware, I believe, would become not a thing anymore. Ransomware would go away because it would not basically be able or have the ability to execute itself from a computer, because Windows App Locker or software restriction policy, which is the earlier version of Windows App Locker, will basically block those things from being executed. But unfortunately, many places don't enable it because A, they are afraid, B, they don't have the proper training, C, they just don't know how, right? Or it's too much trouble, or it might cause issues, right? Initial pain of implementing something new, right? So
user pain.
yeah, exactly, right. And that's a huge thing, right? And I'm not trying to dismiss that. It absolutely is, right? But at the same time, if these things were done properly, the basics, I think the entire world would be in a much better cybersecurity position than we are today.
It's interesting because it's that tipping scales, and we talk a lot about it at Next Dimension with our clients, and we've been publishing a lot of content about it online around, that delicate balance between performance and efficiency and that optimal security. So how much can you secure without crippling the efficiency and performance of your business? And vice versa. How much do you open your business to become efficient and performance, uh, to lead with performance, but then also you open yourself up to all of these vulnerabilities? It's crazy. So thank you very much, and you can see again why we're worth to have these conversations. And of course, with Next Dimension, we work with Tom and Peter very closely on a number of projects. So so the more you engage with us, the more you'll have these gentlemen and a trio of us working together. The next question that we did have come through was, is there a method to test current backups to ensure they have not already been compromised?
Yeah, so maybe I can start with that one, Tom, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So this is a kind of there's a number of methods, and it depends what backup methods you use and what applications you use to do those, etc. And I can't go into huge amounts of detail, but some general points about this one would be, first of all, it's very much recommended in cybersecurity circles that you practice restoring your data. So the general rule of thumb is at least annually do either a restore or a partial restore of your backup data, and make sure that your data is available and your applications can run it. A lot of businesses and organizations actually forget about the application part. So they've got the data backed up and they forget about how they're going to restore the application to actually access the data. So a full or partial restore at least annually is the recommended approach. But there are other things that can and should be done, maybe in between those as well. One of them is comparing files, comparing the backup file to the production file, literally just looking at, and if it's encrypted, and I'll speak about encryption in a minute, but if it's encrypted, you need to decrypt for this. Most backup tools allow you to do file comparisons like that. And also, if you're backing up in the cloud, many cloud backup providers will give the customer tools to be able to actually do an integrity scan of their backup files and compare them on the bit level without having to restore them. And it's reasonably quick and easy to do that. They should be done. I think that's a business decision for each organization, but from a cybersecurity point of view, I would say at least monthly or quarterly, those types of quicker file integrity scans should be done. Now, I'm going to talk quickly a bit about encryption. We recommend encrypting your backups. Tom, I believe, has got actually more than one story about that, and I'll hand over to you in a sec, Tom, on that one. But sure. Obviously, encryption protects your backup data from easily being accessed. So it's recommended from that point of view. But the real key point I want to make is that a lot of organizations make the mistake, and it is a mistake, to think that encrypting backups means that they can't be ransomwared. That is a myth. If your backup data is encrypted and ransomware hits it, it will just encrypt the encrypted file. So a file's a file's a file. So don't make the mistake of thinking that because your backups are encrypted, you're protected from ransomware. That does not protect you from ransomware. So that's the real key gem point I want to make. And now I'm going to hand over to Tom for some fun war stories.
Thanks, Pete. No, I totally agree with you. You're bang on. The only other thing that I might add is, how sometimes when you download an ISO from a particular vendor, they generate like an MD5 hash, which allows you to then verify if that ISO has been tampered with in any way, right?
Right.
So perhaps that could be a suggestion if you create your backup file.
Good
and then
idea.
You have some sort of a batch file or some sort of a process which would then generate an MD5 hash of that particular backup file. And then you store that somewhere, and then before you restore it, you double check the MD5 hash, and if it's different, then you know that someone has tampered with your backup file, right?
Yeah.
So that's a good one. With respect to encryption, I totally agree with you. Encryption is a must for any backup file. So one interesting penetration test that comes to mind was a number of years ago. This particular organization had network attached storage, a NAS, available on the network. And that NAS had a bunch of shares. And at this point, I don't recall if it was shared over Windows SMB or if it was shared over Linux NFS. In any case, I had open access to that share. And within that share, I located a bunch of Veeam backup files, right? So I ended up thinking to myself, okay, well, I wonder what's on these things, right, within these backup files. And some of them, it appeared as though they were backups of virtual servers. So I ended up just opening up Google or Chrome or whatever and heading over to Veeam's support site. And I downloaded a utility, which is free. Anybody can download it, right? It was basically a command line utility to open a Veeam backup. So I ended up doing that. I downloaded the tool, I opened up the Veeam backup, and wouldn't you know, the backup was not password protected. Had it been, there's no way I would have had access to it because I wouldn't know the password. But because it wasn't password protected, it wasn't encrypted with a password, I gained access to it, right? And yeah, sure enough, I found a bunch of virtual machine images. And as you know, virtual machines have these virtual hard drives, a VMDK. So remotely, like you said, a file is a file is a file. So once I had access to it, I basically accessed that VMDK virtual hard drive, and using some tools, I found the Windows operating system on these hard drives, and it was able to get access to the registry. And using some additional tools, I was able to dump the local accounts for that virtual machine, which of course included the local administrator account and the hashed password, the LM/NTLM hash for the local admin account. And that was my elevation path. Using that, I was able to log in to the specific server that was backed up with administrative privileges. And that just kind of led the way to, achieving domain admin, right? So that's just an excellent example why backups should always be encrypted, just to, make sure you keep the bad guys out.
And this is why we're glad Tom's on our side.
Yeah, me too.
It is fun, though. I have to admit, it is a lot of fun.
Speaking of being on a system, the next question here is, how would you know if there is attackers, not Tom, but attackers on your system? Is there a test that needs to be done on a periodic basis, daily, weekly? Is this something that makes sense in a security posture?
So that's an interesting question. And unfortunately, there is no good answer because, well, I guess the short answer is you wouldn't. And the reason why you wouldn't is because attackers will do the same everyday things that regular users would do. Once they once they steal someone's password, they basically impersonate that user. And if that user has access to a particular PC, to a particular server, through remote desktop, if there's any file shares on the network, They will have the same level of access. They will have the same level of access to Active Directory. So I guess the short answer is that you just wouldn't, because these attackers don't typically do things that would draw a whole lot of attention to themselves, right? So then I guess the second part to that question, if I can just kind of ask my own question, is then what do? How would you detect these folks, right? In those cases? Well, again, it's very hard. I think the only way to properly do that would be to have logging of security events, not only from Active Directory, not only from your network switches, firewall, routers, et cetera, but you also want to ensure that you log security events from your regular workstations. Now, when you do that, that can generate way too many events, right? Information overload. And what ends up happening at that point is people basically stop listening, right? So the better approach would be to enforce logging for security events, but then filter the logs and only look at specific events on the desktop computer, right? And again, those could be log on, log off, locked accounts, changes of passwords, installation of programs, installation of services, all these typical things that attackers would do. Unfortunately, over the last 10, 11 years, very few. I would say that, and again, this is my own personal experience, I would say that about 40% of the clients I've been to have effective logging in place, right? And so the remaining 60% have no logging whatsoever, or a little bit of logging, which in the end becomes very ineffective. And when we talk about logging, some companies end up choosing to use third parties, right? So they sign up with a third-party vendor, which says, yeah, not a problem. We'll put a device in your network, and that device is going to collect all these events from all of your systems. And then we have a NOC, and we've got these experts that will sit there and look at their screens all day. And if we see anything, they're going to send you an alert. Well, I have another cool story. So, again, a number of years ago, doing an assessment for an organization here in Ontario, and they were using a third-party vendor for logging, right? So they outsourced. It was a 3 or 4 day engagement. In any case, I was there for a number of years or a number of days. The very first day of the engagement always focuses on exploitation, right? Can I get access to Active Directory? Can I get domain admin? Blah, 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 blah. So long story short, I ended up getting full access to the network, and then on the second day, I ended up starting the audit portion of the security assessment. So that means doing automated vulnerability scans. And anyone that's done vulnerability scans in the past knows that they are very noisy on the network. It's like taking a sledgehammer and hitting a big, bell saying, "Hey, I'm here," right? So on the second day, I went through all of my automated scans, not being very noisy on the network. On the third day of the assessment, and I was sitting in the general area with the rest of the IT group. So on the third day of the assessment, they ended up getting a phone call from the vendor saying or asking a question. Oh, hey, by the way, so when are these security pen testers coming in to do the pen test? Right? Exactly. Yes. So long story short, 0 alerts generated by the security vendor. But wait, the story gets better. So after that, there were a lot of questions back and forth through email, blah, 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 blah. Of course, the vendor was trying to shift the blame away into something, they were saying, well, PowerShell logging was not enabled in your environment, so we wouldn't see that. And I basically said to the client, hey, listen, I did not spin up PowerShell even once. I basically used the Windows command prompt a lot of times and this and that and, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, I came back the next year, right? The following year, repeated the entire process over again. Can you guess how many alerts were received by the vendor or by the company, by the client? Zero.
Did they stick with the same vendor?
They did.
They did. Oh, really? See.
They did.
We have had so many experts on with us for so many virtual and in-person events that say the number of companies is over 60% of the number of companies that get hacked or get attacked or some major cyber event, and they do nothing to change their ways.
Yeah, absolutely. But wait, the story gets even better.
I feel like I'm in an infomercial.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? Call now, 25% off, or get two.
Right, but wait,
Yes, but wait. So after that second engagement, the vendor basically reached out to the client and said, okay, you know what? We've changed our processes. We're much better now. So we're going to pay for that security expert to come back for a single day, but don't tell us when. And this time we're going to catch him or her or whatever, right? So I said, okay, sure, no problem. I'll come down. I went down for one day. All I did was the typical exploitation stuff, right?
Yeah.
Zero alerts again. Zero alerts again. Yes.
Wow.
Right. And, you know, so, I mean, there might be many reasons why. Who knows? I don't know. I don't really want to guess, right? But the moral of my story is not that third-party outsourcing of logging and alerting is bad. It isn't, right? I mean, because there are some really good vendors out there that do a fantastic job and they work really well, blah, 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 right? But what you have to do as a client is keep them honest. So every once in a while, create an account in Active Directory and add yourself to the domain admins group and see if you get an alert from them, right? Or do something nefarious and see if you get an alert from them. So that keeps them honest. And it also makes sure that, hey, they are actually listening. Someone is looking at these things, right? Yeah. The other thing that I would say is your NLA, right? The whatchamacallit, oh my gosh, my mind just completely went blank. The not NLA, SLA, I'm sorry.
SLA, service level.
Yes, yeah. The service level agreement, right? Make sure that you actually test it, because I've been to places that used third parties. They had an SLA agreement of within 20 minutes, they would get an alert. Okay. So we went through and did a bunch of tests of this alerting system. And basically, in some cases, the alert didn't show up at all. In other cases, the alert came 2 hours later rather than the 20 minutes that they specified within the SLA, right? And there were many reasons for that. Once the client started investigating with the vendor why these alerts weren't firing, the vendor discovered that, oh, the logic in this rule was completely broken, so it didn't work, so it never would have fired, right? In other cases, it was, yeah, you know what? The threshold that we had set for this particular rule was way too high. So again, it would never fire, right? So that's what I mean by keeping these guys honest. You want to do your own testing, you want to, and then make sure that the service level agreement, you know, if they say we're going to generate an alert within 20 minutes, make sure that you test that and you do get an alert within 20 minutes. And, you know, like I said, many vendors out there that do a fantastic job, but then on the other hand, you've got vendors that do a really poor job. So, yeah.
And interestingly, if I may, just at the end of that, make these couple of points. This brings us right back to a couple of points we spoke about earlier. Vulnerability assessments on their own, just on their own, they're a valuable tool, but on their own are not going to help with this situation. And the other thing is, again, assume breach now. So if you are targeted by someone with Tom's kind of skills and the right tool set and the right motivation, they're probably going to have some success. So assume breach.
Yes, I would agree. Totally.
I'm sad to say we're coming up to our last question. And again, another lightning fast hour, have you know, because I'm watching the ticker here. What would you say is the average delay that people are seeing between data capture and when the first ransom request is made? So, as an example, what's the optimal history for backup? 7 days, 30 days, 90 days? How long? What say you, gentlemen?
Maybe I could lead on this one, Tom, if you don't
Sure,
mind.
please do.
So the average delay, if you measure it today, it's likely to change tomorrow. So there's not a firm answer for that, and it also depends on the circumstance, how firm a grip the attackers or the threat actors have on your data or your organization, how long it takes them to get that grip, and what their MO is, their modus operandi. So a lot of the ransomware attacks are coming from very well organized crime organizations. They're organizations in their own right. Ransomware is a multi-billion-dollar per annum industry.
It's a business.
Yes, it's an actual criminal business. There are ransomware as a service providers in some geographic regions of the world that are difficult to shut those things down on. So the answer to the question really is not firm, because it will definitely vary, and the one certainty is that it will change as well. So really what I would suggest as an answer for this question is you should look at your business requirements and set up recovery time objectives and recovery point objectives. Again, having assumed a breach, do your incident response planning, do your recovery planning, set up your recovery time and recovery point objectives, and then make your decisions for your organization based on those. That's what I would suggest is the best approach to this. And I wish I could give you, I think, Tom, you'll agree, I wish we could say, oh, it's 2 days or it's 2 weeks. We just can't say that. And I don't think we're going to be able to say that either. So
Totally agree.
That's the best advice I could offer.
Agreed. And I don't think there's much more than I can add to that answer, because I think you covered it perfectly. I think in terms of a good example, maybe might be the Colonial Pipeline in the US, right? When they got hit with ransomware, they ended up paying that $4.4 million or whatever it was. And the decryption tool was so slow that they ended up restoring from their backups anyway, right? So in some cases, just because you pay doesn't mean that you're going to be up and running within a day or two. But at the same time, I think Pete brought up a really good point that how much time will it take to restore your backups, right? Because if you're using a tapes are fairly slow, right? So if you have a huge data set, then, recovery might take not just days, but it could take a week, could take multiple weeks, right, to restore all your systems. And then I think the criticality of the data that you're storing or you're saving would also dictate how often you back it up, right? Like a bank, for example, right? They have to do, I would assume that banks do probably hourly backups or maybe even, real-time backups. Who knows, right? Because transactionally, things are changing all the time, right? Now, most businesses aren't in a business, in that transactional type of business, but you want to make sure that you're covered because, like you said, just because you're syncing to OneDrive or whoever else doesn't mean you've got a backup, right? Because that's not really a true backup. A backup should be offline, stored somewhere, on a tape or whatever that the attackers can't get access to, right? So
exactly, at least logically, if not physically segregated from the network. And again, it's a lot of work, but it's much more work to try and deal with a successful ransomware attack, and a lot more cost too.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
Yes. And you can control that cost. You can control the budget and the planning, as opposed to dealing with a catastrophe like a ransomware attack. Well, I can only imagine the kinds of questions that we'll get out of this recording. So I hope that just gentlemen, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, and for anyone watching, be on the lookout because I'm sure we will have more conversations like this, and maybe we'll even be in person again one day, but we won't get too far ahead of ourselves.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you,
once again,
Brandy.
thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Brandy,
Pete.
Tom,